Welcome everyone. My name is Tom Willing. I'm a member of the Northwest Woodturners and the Pacific Northwest Woodturning Guild down in Portland, Oregon. Today we're going to be doing a demonstration on how to turn a piece like this into a piece like that with a slip-fitted lid that pops when you open it. So I'll clear all these out of the way and we'll get to mounting up our block of wood. I've marked the center with a dimple made on each end, and I've looked at the wood, and I think I'm going to make this the base end, so I want to put the top to my left. And bring up my tailstock for support. And we'll rotate it to make sure it spins right. One trick is, once you get it tight, back off just a little bit, and that will save the life of your bearings on your machine. It clears the tool rest, and the tool rest is just slightly lower than the center line of the lathe. Oh, I don't know if you can hear that click or not, but I got too close when I changed it there. There we go. Okay, so I now have the workpiece mounted on the lathe with the top towards the headstock. That would be, the top is that way, and this is the bottom, and I'll label that just so I remember. That's because of these little flaws that I see here. I can probably work around those as long as they're in the base, but in the top, which is a little thinner, it'll be a little more difficult. Now I'm ready to round it down with a spindle roughing gouge. Here, what you want to do is use the old ABC method. You come down above the cut, you lower it until just the bevel is hitting, and then you start the cut by lowering the tip of the tool into the wood very slowly and making a fine chip. Okay. So one of the things I want to be sure to point out is that you should always start with little cuts that work from one end to the other, and then reverse direction when you get just to the end. If you start your cut here, you run the chance of splitting a big old piece of kindling off your stock, and you might even have to throw it out. So I'll demonstrate that. I'm going to run it about 11 to 1200 RPMs, unless it feels out of balance, which it doesn't. So here we go. Reversing directions as I get to the end. So what you've seen is I've worked in little cuts from one end, changed directions once I get to the other end so that I'm coming off the wood. You never want to try to come on the wood. That's a great way to have a catch and make kindling again. So I'll show you that movement again, even though we're down a little bit. Once you get it down almost around, then you can start going back and forth because the tool and the machine will handle that. Now you can get a smooth cut with a spindle roughing gouge just by canting the angle a little bit. And you can see it takes a very small, light cut. That saves you having to go find your skew unless you want to. My next tool is a skew, and I use a round nose skew, which I find, in the words of Richard Draffin, is a lot less exciting when you make a mistake. I find I can keep it sharp and I can handle it much more easily. So I'm going to just smooth my cylinder. It's good practice, but it's not necessary. I like doing it because I like the 250 grit finish that a skew will leave me. Notice I come off the wood. And you probably can't see my knees here, but the cut is coming from my knees. You don't see a lot of motion in my arms or hands or body. It's all very fine to me. And there's that. And that certainly feels good. Next thing I'm going to do is, I use a skew for this generally, although you can use a badan or a parting tool. I'm going to square the ends so that there's a nice clean end on both ends. I'm going to repeat that cut in the air so that you can see what it looks like. I start with the handle down, and it makes an arc as it comes over towards the axis of the lathe. And I find that that does the best job on squaring it up. And I touch that corner just because it can make a slice of turkey out of my hand. Over here on this end, because I have the piece mounted in a chuck, I'm going to use my half-inch, maybe it's 3/8, 10 mil parting tool, because it'll go down in the hole. Like so. So my next step is to plan where I'm going to make all my various cuts and parts in the box. Remember that I said the top was going to be up here and the bottom is going to be here. I want to do a couple of things. The first one is I want to lay out a spigot on each end of my blank. And somewhere around 3/16 of an inch, 3 or 4 mils is good for that. So I'm going to do that one. And so now I have a spigot on each end. Now I want to look at where do I want to place the lid. I want to place the lid so that the grain lines up as optimally as possible. And looking at this, I think right about in here is the extent of my lid. So this will be the base. Right there. And so this will be the top. Like so. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out a parting line here that's just the thickness of the skinniest parting tool I've got. And the idea there is that the less space we take out of here, the better when it comes to making the grain match up later on. And then the other thing I have to take into account is leaving enough on the base to part off a way to mount the base when I reverse it on the lathe. And show you that. I now have the base here. I'm going to mount it in the lathe here to form it, and then I'm going to flip it onto a jam chuck to shape the bottom and put this decoration in there. Next step is to form a dovetail spigot on each end of my workpiece that will fit into the dovetail jaws of my chuck. To do that, I use my round nose skew, and that just gives me exactly the right angle to fit the dovetail jaws as it goes in. I'm going to take it down to this diameter that I have preset on a vernier caliper, and I'll do that right now. Okay, this next trick, if you use it, go ahead and make sure you've got a good grip on the caliper, because you've got a nice little arrow going around if it gets away from you. And I just rub it gently, I don't push. When it pops over, you're done. And then on this end, same thing. Now, to be honest, if you've made a couple dozen boxes the way I have, you get a pretty good idea of what your right diameter should be, and you wind up not measuring it. I rarely go too far. So my next step is to set up the piece in the chuck so that I can part off the bottom of the box. I'll take the tailstock away and remove the stem center. Handy little Christmas present I got a few years back. Okay, I'm going to put the top in the chuck. Always wiggle it back and forth before I take it down to make sure there's nothing under the jaws, which will throw it off. And I tighten up evenly as I go. And I give it a spin to make sure it's running true, and it's running just about as true as you could expect, not perfect. Okay, this is my narrow parting tool. It's made by D-Way Tools, and you'll notice that it's a lot skinnier on the top than it is on the bottom, which gives it relief in the cut, and it makes it a wonderful tool for doing these little parting cuts. What I'm going to do here is part the base from the top, leaving the top mounted in the chuck. At this point, a lot of guys will just keep on going. Other guys will take a little thin perf saw and just saw it off. It doesn't matter here, but there are parts later on where you don't want to part it all the way to the center with the parting tool. So, I'll show you my little Japanese saw. And as I'm doing this, I like to rotate the lathe. Listen to the sound. And there you have your cut. Okay, my next step is to hollow the lid of the box. And to do that, I use a spindle detail gouge that has an asymmetric grind on it. And I think against the wood you'll see that those two sides aren't the same. That allows me to make one cut with one side and a different kind of cut with the other side of the tool, two cuts with one tool. Bring this up. My rule of thumb here, and I usually do this too close, but about the length of the bevel from the stock is right. You don't want to be a lot farther than that because as you're going in, you're going to run away from that. But start with a pull cut. Leave enough room here to make a rabbet on the inside and leave a shoulder on the outside for the lid to land on the top of the box. Another thing to bear in mind is what you want the shape of the inside of the box to be like. Now this one, to be honest, is kind of clunky and thick. It doesn't look it from the outside, but you might have yourself making a thinner one, and if you think now, you're doing the inside of your lid, and then you're bringing the outside of the lid down to the form that you want to end with. So I mentioned that I have an asymmetric gouge, and that's my go-to tool, but that's me. You don't need to have that. This one is a symmetrically ground spindle gouge, and it works just as well, sometimes better, and I will use it on some woods. Let's see if that smoothed up the bottom at all. A little bit. Okay, another thing you can try is your good old bowl gouge. Very light cut. And we'll see, okay, that smoothed those up. Another approach is a scraper. As you do the sides of the lid on the inside, turn your scraper just the littlest bit on its side, and you can see you get dust. And that's probably the best way, short of 80 grit paper, to sand it. Now I've got a fat spot there that I don't like. You probably also don't see that I'm watching the cut over here, not the tip of the tool. I can't even see the tip of the tool, but the cut over here will tell me what I'm doing. So, the next thing I'm going to do is a quick sand. And I'll probably start with 120 because that's plenty. That's 220, there's my 120. I try to stack my grit of paper in order, but sometimes I don't get there. Now, I sand the inside of the box first, the inside of the lid first, and then I cut the rabbet, because what you don't want to do is sand the rabbet after you've cut it. A lot of guys slow the lathe down, and that's good. It doesn't parboil your fingers quite so badly when you do that. It doesn't clog the paper quite so much. Sanding is not a high pressure thing. If you use a light touch with sanding, I find you get better results. I take it down to 420 or 400. It doesn't take very much. There's a little bit of a bump in the bottom of this box. I'm not going to worry about that tonight. It's even easier to just make a decorative element out of that little bump than it is to go through the top of the box trying to take it away. All right, okay. My next step is to form this edge a little bit. I want the box lid to land on the outside diameter, not the inside diameter. And I'm going to make a little rabbet in there which will catch the spigot that's on the top of the bottom of the box. This is where your fit starts. What you need here is to have the inside diameter where you make the rabbet an exact cylinder. And here's how you do that. I'm going to go in parallel to the bedway. And I need to turn it back up again. About 1500. About 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch is all you need for depth. Okay, now I'm going to take my inside calipers and release them until they're snug in the rabbet, all the way at the bottom. And then you can see it's loose out here. So I don't have a cylinder, I have a cone. Let's turn it into a cylinder. And I don't know if you saw how fine a cut that was. Chances are good you'll have another chance to see that, because I don't know that I rarely hit it on the first try. Okay, I'm still a little loose at the bottom end and a little tight at the top, so you are going to see it. if you follow the edge of the tool, I'm not taking very much there. And I may have taken too much. Trying to show you what I'm doing. Each time you adjust, you have to release the caliper just a little more. Okay, now I'm too tight at the outside. Just keep sneaking up on it. And if it keeps the same tension on the caliper all the way out, pretty close. One more touch. Hopefully one more touch. There we go. So, and it's amazing how precision the tool your hand is. You can feel that, you can feel very slight differences in tension once you get used to what you're looking for. I forgot to explain about this tool. It's a standard scraper, but it has a different shape on the end. You can see right here they're almost right angles. This allows me to do the bottom of the box on this edge and the side of the box on this edge. So there's my rabbit cutting tool, and then when I get to the bottom of the box, I'll use it across the bottom that way. Okay, my next step is to begin forming the outside of the box lid. I'm not going to finish it because I need access to the end before I do that. But I can take some of this material away so it's easier to work with later. I cheated a little bit. I mentioned earlier that I was going to do that cut I just made, but then I see I forgot to do it. Okay. So I will be back to that to refine it later. My next step, once I get this roughly down to size, is to take the top out of the chuck and put it aside for a second and mount the bottom in the chuck so that I can begin forming that. Good. I'll start the process of fitting the lid to the base using my skew. And what I want to do is figure out just where I need to leave material here to fit the inside diameter of the rabbit. And I'm in pretty good shape there for material. Except I'm going to see if I can improve on that. Nope. Fortunately, it's not going to matter because I'm taking material away and it'll all true up as we go. So now I'm going to cut just a very thin spigot like so. And I'll do a test fit. And I don't go over yet, which is good. I don't want to do any more than just fit. And my spigot is it's only about, oh, it might be 1.5 millimeters tall at this point. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to taper my spigot into a cone and try my fit again. You see how it jumps? It's almost in the right place. And you can see right by the tip of the tool, there's a little bit of a burnish. That's what you want to go for. So I'm going to go in, make a cylinder. And then I'm just going to touch there to make another cone. And there I have it. And you can see, again by the tip of the tool, that the burnish is farther down the spigot. So that's what I'm going for. I don't want to go past that. Now, what I want to make is a spigot that's just slightly shorter than this distance here. And to do that, I'm going to go in. Once I get towards the bottom, I'm going to round it just slightly. And if you were looking at it right from my eye, you would see that it's tapered. And we'll try another fit. Okay, I'm not there. This is dust time, not big cuts. Okay. Okay, that's good for what I want. It won't go on straight. That means that the spigot is just a little bit too big. So now, here's the next important trick to making your lid fit properly. I sneak up on it with a tapered spigot so that I have material left to cut away. If I just go straight in and I go too far, I'm done. I have to start all over again. If I go in on a little bit of a taper and make sure it fits right at the very outer edge, then I can adjust the spigot back to the right place and I sneak right into my fit. So taking that, I'm going to just touch right there. And my next step, you can see I've swung the tool around a little bit so that my shoulder is not exactly flat. It's got a little bit of slope to it. And using the very point of my skew, I'm going to take a little bit out from the very bottom of the spigot. And then I'm going to try my fit again. I'm not quite there. But what that does is it makes the shape of the spigot curved so that the rabbet just touches on part of the spigot, not the whole thing. Once I have that round shape, I want to keep taking it back the same amount over the whole spigot. Okay, a creak is a good sound, but you can see it's not going on all the way. So we got one creak out of that. Another thing I forgot to do earlier, yeah, that's better. That just smooths up this end grain there so that it's not all rough. Ratso. I went too far. So, there are some tricks. Paper towels are wonderful. I now have a fit. It's not a fit that I trust. So I bring up the tailstock and I just touch. I don't put it on real tight. And I check it to make sure it's a light touch. Okay, so now I'm ready to form the basic form of the whole box. So now I'm going to use my spindle gouge to start refining the piece. Okay, this will make a little flat decorative finial. One thing the kitchen paper does is, if you use the right color, you can always see where the join is, and that's always handy when you're making your decorative form on the outside. The reason I talk about this join is it's a design element, and it's very difficult to make that join invisible because the joint will always catch a little bit of light. It takes on the dirt of time and handling differently. So it'll always show. Better to make it a decorative element. This one here is a double bead, and you can see there's where it comes apart. This one is a single bead, and it comes apart that way. So experiment with this. This is dependent on your eye and what you decide over time your aesthetic is going to be. So for this piece, I'm going to make a double bead. I'm going to try to match the size of this bead as closely as possible, and sometimes I succeed with that and sometimes I don't. And then I probably will match this little V-cut on the bottom too, and then this will taper so that it's more like this piece, tapering towards the base. Gives the piece a little bit of lightness off the surface. Okay. Second bead. Well, not exact. You may notice that the more precise my cut, the less I do with my body and the more I do with my knees. My cut started to get a little heavy there, so I lightened up and took in 2 passes. I'm leaving a mounting block here for the base to go onto. Now, I'm sure that you've never had a situation go where you start out headed one way and discover that you've done something that heads you in another. And that's what just happened to me here. Try an experiment here. Okay, what I've done here is I started by making a mistake. I got a little heavy-handed with my cut, and instead of making a nice sweep this way, I now have a little bit of a cove going the other way. Sometimes happens. And what I'm doing with the skew is I'm trying to smooth up some of these rumples that the gouge inevitably makes. I was tempted to try this one going against the grain with a skew, but I don't think I better try that. I don't think I'll get away with it on this piece here. So let's try to smooth this up a little bit. Okay, that improved that. I might go against the grain just enough to clean that up. And clean out my bead. There we go. This V needs cleaning out too. I'm always working to keep the tip of the tool working and the heel of the tool out of the cut. So if I'm working this way, there's the tip and there's the heel. If I'm working this way, there's the tip and there's the heel. Skew is kind of perverse that way, it flips on you. Now I'm going back to my detail gouge. I'm going to fix that little rough spot there. Making some more work for myself to do with the skew. And then I'm going to make a bead here that matches these beads there. And just like so. Next thing I'm going to do is take my parting tool and get this parting cut where I want it, which is right at the bottom of that bead. And that will allow me to take my skew and fix that. And maybe just a touch with my gouge to fix that up nice and smooth. Now at this point I'm not going to do a lot of sanding, but I would sand the whole outside and get it down to my finish on the outside as much as possible. So now you can see I've repositioned my tool rest a little bit to get it closer to where I'm going to form the finial on the top of the box. I need to support this cut with my hand, so you'll see my hand on the lid the whole time. Hopefully this loose fit that I fixed with the kitchen paper will be strong enough to do what I need to do. And so, very light cut. And if your hand is getting too hot, you're trying to do too much at a time. Okay, now when I do demos and shows for kids making tops, I also like to make them a little tiny bowl. And there we have it. Okay, now I think this angle is not quite steep enough. There we go. And I feel a little bit of roughness on there. Let's see if I can get rid of that. Oh yeah. Now we'll take a look at it and see how it looks. That's pretty good. This little nubbin at the top is tough to get rid of, and a lot of times it's abrasives that does it. That's better. So now, except for sanding, which I don't want to put you through in a demo, this is pretty much ready to go. So we'll take the lid off, and I'll drop the tool rest out of the way and back up the banjo. And sometimes I had a better fit there than I thought I did. So there's my lid, and that's finished. Now what I have to do is hollow the bottom of the box. Same as for hollowing the top. Find my spindle gouge. And I'll start it with a spindle gouge, but because of the depth, I'll probably finish it with a scraper. And finishing it, I'll take it down to about where the top of the bead on the bottom is. So, here I go. When I have my hand one way out into open air like this, I want to be sure I keep my left hand solid on the tool rest. At this point, I'm going to go to my round nose scraper. And I'm flying blind here because I can't see the tip, so I have to find the cut with the tip. Sometimes with a deeper box, I'll even drill a center hole to gauge my depth by. And that makes it easier. I'm just going to mark with a piece of tape my rough distance. I don't want to be too precise about this. I want to leave myself a little bit of room for mistakes. So now I need to be thinking about my wall thickness. I'm going for something on the order of 1/8 to 1/4. Most of the time it's about 3/16. I find that if they're too light, the boxes crack, and sometimes the bottom can crack the lid if the lid's too thin, so you have to balance things. For depth, I'm going to go in this one for about the bottom of, or the top of this bead here, so that the bottom will be the thickness of the bead a little less when I get done finishing it. So we have a ways to go here. Okay. You still rolling? All right. I'm having a little trouble in the bottom here, and it's partly because of the nature of how a round nose scraper works. So what I may do is go back to this friend that I talked about earlier that has the square part across the bottom, and that will help me out. I'm going to advance this edge parallel to the bedway of the lathe so that I'm making a cylinder. Across the center, that's with the tip, and that's cutting the edge. So what I've done is I've cut the bottom swinging this way, gone in a little bit, and then I'm cutting over on this edge as I come back. So it's a sweeping motion as I work my way down. Very light cuts. And now I'm going to turn the lathe off and see what I look like down in there. Okay, that's getting there. Now, if you need to refine the sidewall just slightly, you can. And you can see I'm just making light cuts. Let's see how we look now. Now usually with a form like this, I like the bottom of the box to be a little bit rounded as opposed to square. It's a square box, square bottom. If it's a curvy box, then we want to do a little bit how we look now. Now you can't see down in there all the way, and I'm not totally happy with it. Let's take it one more cut this way. And now I'm going to square up the dimple in the bottom. And I would say, let's see how that looks, but feel is probably your better tool. Now, with this tool, because the angles are not square to the tool, sometimes it's more difficult to work with. And in that case, I pull out a tool like this, which goes square across the bottom, but is rounded at the corner. So this tool cuts pretty square across the end, but it's got a nice radius in the corner. And a tool shaped like this, and you can do it with any piece of steel you want, makes the cutting of the bottom of the box a whole lot easier to do. I took a broom handle actually and made a thin kerf with my Japanese saw down into the end grain, which allows me to stick my piece of sandpaper into the slot. You can see it sticks out there. I pull it down flush. Whoops, I always do that. I want it to go this way. So now it's flush there, wraps around, and now I can handle anything I want to do to the inside of the box with my abrasive this way. And so you have to wrap it the right way because you want the wrap to tighten the paper, not loosen it. This allows you to hold the sandpaper against the side or push it into the bottom. And I'm going to take off the edges of the rough spots. Do not sand down in here. That will loosen your lid. Okay? And I'm sure all of you have basic sanding techniques, but you can do that, and you see all that stuff flying around. I don't want that in Roger's camera gear. So we're on to the next. Now what I've done is I have positioned my tool rest so that I can make the parting cut right here that will separate the bottom of the box from the waste block that's in the chuck. One of the things I want to do is start with a cut that's exactly perpendicular to the axis, but now what I'm going to do is ease it just slightly so that the box lands on its outer perimeter, not with a bump in the middle that makes it rock. And as I get close, I want to hang on to the box. So my next step is to make a spigot on this waste block that I can use to force the bottom of the box onto, and that allows me free access to the bottom of the box to clean all this fuzzy stuff up. The fitting process is exactly the same as it was for fitting the lid. It needs to be a good fit because you have to hang on to the box with the jam chuck in order to work it across the end. You can see I'm not quite there yet. I'm going to leave a little bit right here just to keep something between my tool and the jaws of the chuck. And now here I go with my cone. I'm going to taper the spigot and fit. And now I'm going to take my spigot down to where the cone stops and make a fresh cone. And I'm almost there. Okay, I'm pretty close. Now the working fit on this one needs to be a little tighter, so we're not going to use the beaded spigot for this the way we did with the other. We're going to taper. Okay, it'll just hold. And now what I want to do Testing it while it's still spinning gives you an idea, but you want to do your live test with the lathe off. Now, this is where you can crack your box if you push too hard or make too tight a fit, but too loose a fit doesn't hang on to it. So, easy does it, little bit at a time. Not quite there. Uh-oh. Too loose. That's what we do. A little bit of a wobble. So sometimes you can't avoid that. If you get a little bit of a wobble, you're done here completely. You can work across this face with relative impunity. And yeah. All right, that improved it a little bit, not much. So this cut is to smooth up the bottom. And I'm going to pull my tool rest in as close as reasonable. So my first thing to do is to smooth the bottom so that I know what I have to work with. And I'll do that with a shearing cut with my skew. And because it's a little out of round, it may take some tinkering. Notice I've got my hand on the piece all the time. Check it to make sure that it clears in the middle, which it does. I'll check to see that I've actually got it smooth, which I don't. And now I really don't. Scraping cut, this turns your skew into a negative rake scraper when you turn it on its side like that. And now I'm going to go back. I did it again and again. Very tricky cut, obviously. Now let's see how much damage I actually did. Well, could be worse. I think I can take that out just with scraping cuts. If I wanted to spend more time on it with sandpaper, that might prove a better result, but we're not going to worry about it for now. Now, that's almost there. If I were doing this for sale instead of teaching, I would probably put a lot more time into getting that really smooth, but you've seen the cuts that I use for that. The next thing I'll do is just a light decorative touch. And a lot of guys will do 2 grooves and call it good, because if you do 3 grooves, you've got to do something to make them look like they fit together. And the easy way to do that, I find, is to do 1 in the middle, and 2 on the outside, and you have it. And so there we have our box. We've got the decorated bottom, we've got a bead at the very bottom and 2 at the join and 1 at the top, a little finial, and you can put all kinds of things inside it. And depending on the humidity, that lid might tighten up enough to hold. It's not quite as tight as I like them, but almost. So, question time.
How big is the box?
The box 5 1/8, and the maximum diameter is going to be 2 3/4. And the bottom is 2 3/4 deep. And the inside diameter is about 2 inches at the join.
And what kind of wood?
This is Oregon myrtle. Just I save pieces from all of my bowls. All the corners make boxes, they make eggs, they make spheres. So I can't stand to throw out pretty wood when I have it, so I keep it around. And as I told Roger a minute ago, I'm starting to throw it out, which hurts. But that's where we are when you have a big collection of stuff.
And do you always recommend using dry wood for a box?
Yes, and the reason is green wood shifts, and sometimes it doesn't shift uniformly. Sometimes you luck out with green wood if you're doing lengthwise, because you can always put it together in the same orientation it was in when it was in the tree, so that if it shrinks to an oval this way, the lid and the bottom are going to shrink together and they still fit nominally. Probably will have to adjust the fit on one if you do that, but and here's a wood turner's petty beef. You go to a show and everybody will look at your boxes and they'll say, "Oh, pretty, pretty box." And they take it apart and they put it away with the grain not matching. So you will do every wood turner you see in a show a favor by putting the lid back on so the grain matches.
And how would you finish that box?
I like to finish them using walnut oil and wax. You can finish them with wipe-on poly or lacquer, spray lacquer. I just like the look of oil, especially on highly figured wood, because I don't want to obscure the figure of the wood. I want to bring that out. And it feels like to me that the oil does the best job of that.
And you do the inside and the outside the same?
Same finish inside and out. Same level of abrasive, everything's the same.
And how far do you sand it?
I start usually with 120, just because a little bit of 120 is faster than a lot of sanding with 180. And then I take it up to 400. When I get it finished and the oil hard, then I'll buff it with a rag, or if it needs it, 4/0 steel wool.